Okay, welcome to the Division of Adult Education monthly webinar for June 12th, 2025. This session is being recorded. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. No other recording of this session is allowed. That includes any kind of AI note-taking. So if you have that on your computer, please turn that off. Okay, so today's agenda, I am going to be turning this over to Chrissy Klinger from Penn State, the IET Technical Assistance Project, to talk about a CDL IET that she developed with some of your colleagues. And then there are a couple of updates and reminders from me for the rest of it. And then at the very end, recognizing a couple people who we know are retiring. So, Chrissy, I will stop sharing and turn things over to you.
Well, thanks everyone for being here today. And just want to quick remind anybody that's not aware of this that in February, a few of us presented to the State Workforce Development Board on IET that was happening in Pennsylvania. So we're going to share some of those same updates with all of you that we shared with the board. And then we're going to dig into a new statewide CDL IET opportunity that's available. Reminder of the current successful IET programs that are occurring in our state. We do have pharmacy technician, community health worker, nurse aide, home health aide, teacher assistant, office administration support, direct care worker, and manufacturing technician. And again, for some of you that may be newer to integrated education and training, IET allows adult education and literacy education to work concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training at a sufficient intensity for adult learners. So this allows adult learners to have an accelerated pathway to occupations that you see here on the screen. These occupations also align to a career pathway. So there's opportunity for growth for after IET. So some of you may have been aware that we had an IET course in the past and it was offered in certain times of the year. We are in the process of moving that to being a more on-demand course. So it will still be in the PD portal. It will have micro-learning videos and meetings with course facilitator, and it will align directly with the IET planning tool. And this is a course that is designed to be for people that want to learn about IET, not just for people who want to implement an IET program. So we're looking at that course to be fully ready in the portal in September. However, from now until September, if you are interested in IET or want more information, you can meet with myself or Allison, who also is on the IET project. And I'll make sure I share my email at the end if you, again, do want to talk about IET or want to learn more about IET before the full course is updated and available in the portal. So when we think about the IET proposal, one of the things that's exciting is that we're working on making that proposal a little simpler and more streamlined, less documents. So we before had like a virtual binder in the course. We had 2 different documents on the division website. So we're pulling everything together to have one planning tool and proposal, one document. And the course is aligned directly to the planning tool. And again, we're trying to make that application shorter. And we're also working towards more options for people to submit regional and statewide IET. So in a little bit, we'll talk about the first approved statewide IET that is available. But one thing to keep in mind, whether you're thinking about joining in on the statewide CDL IET, working with other programs to do a regional IET, or just an IET in your local area, 2 things. Does the IET help the learners obtain in-demand occupations faster than traditional programming? And does the IET meet the needs of local employers? So really bringing students who really want to do a certain occupation, and IET is going to allow them to get into that faster while also having that need by the employer. So that's one reason that we want you to reach out to us at the IET project very early on when you're thinking about IET to help work through how you figure out if the students are, really looking at occupations that would be a good fit for IET, if it would really be the best approach to helping learners prepare for that occupation, and how you work with employers to really determine how often they're going to be filling positions so that you're creating an IET program that works for both employers and adult learners. So before we dig into the CDL IET that we're going to share, I do want to take a moment to thank Northampton Community College, Lehigh Carbon Community College, and Lancaster Lebanon IU 13. All three of those programs not only helped build and put together the statewide CDL IET, but they continue to provide amazing IET programs to adult learners, have great success, and are able to share with us some lessons they've learned along the way. So if you're thinking about IET or thinking about joining in on the statewide IET, these are some things that you may want to keep in mind. So it's, as we said in the previous slide, it's so important to understand what the learners are interested in and what might be a good fit for them, and if IET is the best way for them to get to those occupations they're interested in. So one of the things to get to know your learners better is to do frequent student surveys. I know some programs tend to do student surveys just at the end of the year as a student's leaving a program, but really, asking questions, and that can be in a lot of different ways. The surveys could be informal with like a student support coordinator asking a lot of the same questions to students, or going into classrooms. It could be through Google or Microsoft Forms, paper surveys. So any way that you can collect information consistently and frequently from your students to really have an understanding of what they're interested in. And you want to make sure too that you're going to create an IET for students that actually exist. So your current students are very important. Obviously, they exist and might go into IET, but also future potential students. So in addition to understanding your learners, also understanding other adults in your community that could be adult learners in a program that might be a good fit for IET. So again, you might get that information from different partners, because you definitely don't want to create an IET that students don't exist for. So again, there might be an employer that really has a need, and you think an IET to meet that employer's need would be great, but you also need the learners to want to do that. So that's where also building those strong relationships with employers and having conversations about IET. So again, as I mentioned, we presented at the State Workforce Board. We have some different employers statewide that sit on that board that got that information. We do have a one-pager that we've had several programs be able to use to start conversations about IET. We also at the IET project are willing to help facilitate conversations and explain things to employers and other partners about IET. And then you want to make sure that you are really clarifying entry requirements for the IET, and the proper supports will be provided during the IET. So again, it's intense, it's accelerated. You want to make sure that the learners are, going to be able to commit to it and complete and have success along the way. Another thing to think about before you dig into IET is like, what are the different assessments you currently use as an adult education provider, and how do they align to what your local workforce area uses? So maybe that's your Title I partners. What other occupational training provider requirements are there? Some local employers that use different assessments. You also have some schools that use like an AccuPlacer. We have some schools that are starting to look at, are you getting a GED college ready score? So really important to have a clear understanding of all the different assessments that might be used in your area, and then how that might look, within an IET program. Would you be using some different assessments? Definitely don't want to have learners taking way more assessments than they need to. And then finally, if possible, having new partners who are interested in IET observe an existing IET program. So again, we have many successful IET programs in Pennsylvania, and I know all of them have always been open arms, like come see our program and very proud. And the students love to talk about what they're learning and doing in the IET. We also had Lehigh Carbon Community College in Northampton pull some student video. So we do have a video as well that we shared at the workforce board meeting. So again, um, our partners can maybe share some video if you can't really get people there to observe a program, because again, IET programs aren't running consistently either all year long. So there's definitely different options to see what an IET might look like. And then when we think about IET and a regional approach, so again, maybe you as a single program don't feel ready to dig into IET alone, and you might want to do that more in a regional way. Or there might be an adult education provider doing IET already in your region, and you're thinking about how might we connect some of our adult learners to the IET program that already exists. So very important to know what IETs are available in your region and how they might align to learners' interests. Um, Making sure you're sharing those different requirements with learners, and like we're saying, those entrance requirements, the schedule, the location, the different employment opportunities. Like, does this really all fit with their schedule? Because once a learner starts an IET, there's not a lot of flexibility. So in adult education, typically there's a little bit of wiggle room if you need to step out for a moment and come back. But because IET programs are so concise and sufficient intensity, it really is important that as you prepare learners to look at IET, they fully understand all the requirements, the schedule, and the supports can be put in place to help them be successful. And whenever possible, don't duplicate when you can coordinate and collaborate. But there are times where maybe you would offer the same IET in the same workforce development area by two providers, depending on the locations, the intensity, or the capacity. Sometimes it does make sense to have multiple IETs going to the same occupation and workforce area. But again, just really important to talk with all the partners and see what's going to work best for everyone. Another thing I'll just touch on too with the duplicate and coordinate and collaborate, across the state, we have community health worker opportunities. And so we do have Northampton having a community health worker IET, but we have other programs in the state helping adult learners get into a community health worker pathway in other ways. So again, just really important to talk with partners, both other adult education programs and workforce, to see, what's the best fit for helping adults get into these occupations. So I'm going to pause for a minute and stop this PowerPoint. So before I share the CDL statewide IET, I just want to see if there's any questions about what I shared so far. Okay, if other questions come up, please pop those in the chat. So on the screen, you will see the draft version. So it's just going through final editing. So nothing content-wise is going to change, of the Pennsylvania Regional Statewide Commercial Driver's License CDL Integrated Education and Training. So this has, again, been worked on for many, many months with different adult education providers and training providers. We also spent time talking to other states that have CDL IETs and gathering information from them. So a lot of time and effort and work has gone into this. So again, I just really want to take a moment to thank Northampton, Lehigh Carbon, and IU13 for all their help with this. We then sent this to the division and they worked through it. And so this is an approved IET, first time that we have something that's approved statewide. And so as you'll see on one side here, all of these things will stay consistent among anyone that wants to do this CDL IET. And so if you're ready to jump into this, you would meet with the IET project and we would help you finish these pieces for your specific region. Again, you don't have to do this alone. You could come together as a few different adult education programs and partners to provide a CDL IET in your region. If you want to even join the effort and not actually maybe be part of the full IET, but want to refer learners to some IETs that are happening with CDL, that again is something you can reach out to us so we can say for sure, you know, this program is doing CDL IET. Here's how you might be able to refer learners if they have space. So the things that you'll have to work on are, you know, really your local IET information and what that work plan is going to look like, what your funding is going to look like for your program, how you're going to communicate with your partners, what policies and agreements. So do you need some MOUs or do you need to change any like student handbook policies to, you know, run that IET? And then how your enrollment and intake is going to look. It might be a little different than typical adult basic education orientation that you're doing. And then, you know, finalizing your schedule and location and how you're going to evaluate. So I'm not going to dig into every single piece of this. Early July, this whole document will be available in the PD portal in a space that would allow programs that are interested in this to download this, work with the IET project to get it finalized with your advisor and be able to, you know, start doing this in the 25-26 program year if you're interested in that. But I do want to highlight a few other pieces, so I apologize as I scroll down. One thing that's really important if you would be thinking about doing CDL IET is if you're not currently having learners do career interest inventories, so you can do that on ONET. There's a paper-based one in the PA Career Guide that's put out by the Pennsylvania Department of Labor. You do want to make sure that the learner does an interest inventory and you're able to look at the Holland code. So that goes along with like realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, conventional. And then if you look on ONET online, you'll see, you know, a commercial driver's license will have realistic and conventional listed in that code. So we want the person to have at least realistic or conventional. So there is a good match between their interests, but this shouldn't be the only tool that's used to help learners decide if it's a good fit, but definitely something to be thinking about. Again, with most IETs, but especially with CDL, supportive services are very, very important. With CDLs, you're going to see in a little bit, there's a lot of physical requirements and a lot of regulations. So people may need support to, you know, cover testing fees or physical exam fees, background checks. And a lot of the support they might need is not going to be able to be covered under Title II funding. So again, so important to connect with as many partners as possible to braid funding and collaborate so that people can get all the support they need to be successful. So you as adult education providers are the experts with education and really being able to, you know, do a needs assessment and a barrier identification. But when you get that all finalized, you definitely will need your partners to help with providing the cost and, you know, support with that. So here are some things that, again, I'll highlight that are standard. So if you choose to do this CDL IET, your team does need to have a minimum of an adult education program administrator, an instructor, an occupational training instructor. So you need the adult education instructor and an occupational training instructor, student support coordinator, and then at least one employer and/or a current CDL driver. And definitely, as we said, it works too to have some additional people on the team. So think about your Title I partners, OBR partners, Health and Human Services, other community partners, again, that might be able to provide some of the health and background screenings. The IET for CDL also needs to have a pre-programmed checklist. Most of your training providers throughout the state are going to require certain things to be presented to them before they'll let the students start classes. And from talking with other CDL IET providers in other states, sometimes when they let learners start and then thought they would get this done in the first week or two, that didn't happen and it became a real problem. So towards the end of the document, there's a sample checklist. We also, again, can help you work with your partners to determine what checklists might need to be, changed or used. And, some of your partners as well might have a checklist they already use for their training program. Another big thing is that a person that is going to work towards a CDL license, a commercial driver's license, does have to have a current and an unrestricted PA Class C driver's license. So they might have to get proof that they have that. It might not be enough to say, oh, yeah, my license is fine. Like they might have to go on to the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation website and pull their driver history. They also, like we said, have to be able to complete a physical, and CDL drivers have to frequently do their physicals to keep their license and show it to the Department of Transportation. So that's important. And depending on their health status, that can be more frequent or spread out. The other thing to think about is that the participants are going to have to pass a written CDL exam prior to be able to participate in the driving portion of the training. So they do have to get a permit. And that exam is at about a 6th to 8th grade reading level. We have seen some adults pass that, who are not technically at that reading level, but it is very important to do a reading assessment with the learners and have a sense of how close they are and how difficult it might be to pass the permit to then be able to participate in the training. I'm going to skip ahead to just a few other things. Another really important thing that has to occur across all of them is that minimum 160 hours of instruction. And, of that, we really want to make sure there's at least 40 hours of adult basic education instruction. And then, as we said, there's a lot of different drug screening, background checks, clearances. So again, what is the training provider requiring? What are the employers going to require? So, those things are going to be asked of the student, and it is things we need to think about more regionally. So as we get into this section of the proposal, this is where you might want to work with the IET project and with your partners to clarify specifically which clearances, which screenings will need to be done. Also want to make sure that training providers that you're working with are a local licensed training provider and, are allowed to operate here in Pennsylvania and all that. And again, the IET project can help you with that and clarifying that information. And we do request in this proposal, when you're ready to do it, that you are letting your PDE advisor know at least one employer that's connected with this and committed to doing some type of, interviews or meeting with the participants. And again, this might be something where you as the adult ed provider aren't necessarily setting that up. It might be happening with your career link and business services. But we do want to make sure that you're able to connect those completers to job opportunities. And whenever possible, want to co-enroll learners in other programming, again, to help with the cost. CDL training itself is quite expensive. And it is an in-demand occupation, a high priority occupation in all workforce areas. We have started to have some programs talk with their local boards about the possibility of IET going on eligible training provider list, or possibility of different policies around ITAs, individualized training accounts for Title I participants, changing some of the requirements so they can access those funds. So again, this is something that the IET project can work with you on to help you talk with your partners about that piece. And just go down to finalize sharing. You'll see that this does give you all of the it gives you all the learning objectives. So we call that a single set of learning objectives. So there are 9 learning objectives. And again, the CDL licenses and the trainings are consistent across the state. So there really shouldn't be a reason to change this. But if you would think that you need additional objectives or need to change something, you would need to work with your advisor to do that. And so I just want to go to one example again for some of you that aren't real familiar with IET. There is that learning objective. The learning objective will show that there's adult education and literacy happening. There's the training component, the occupational training, and there's workforce preparation. So you have what's coming from the occupational trainer that needs to be covered in that unit, how that aligns to the CCRS, the Career and College Readiness Standards, and then the workforce preparation, which in Pennsylvania, we have the PA foundation skills that pull together these two pieces. So the workforce preparation, you'll see here, DL would be your distance learning. Sorry, digital literacy, not distance learning, digital literacy under the workforce preparation skills and the PA foundation skills. And then down here, you'll see an example of a transferable skill that also goes along with this. And then also talking about what the assessment of all of this will look like. And then, as I mentioned, as you get to the bottom, there is a sample checklist. And again, we have other samples as well, and some of your training providers will have their own checklist. So that's a quick run through of something exciting that we hope that some of you will meet with the IET project and talk to us more about doing this. We took a lot of the heavy lift of IET off your shoulders, so hopefully allows some of you to be able to get into IET with a little less stress and really, again, do something that is a high priority occupation across all workforce areas. And we, take questions now. And again, this is all very new. So if questions come up in the next few weeks, I'll share my email in the chat as well.
Thank you, Chrissy. I know, Chrissy, you and the group that you worked with have really talked about it really is, creating an IET from scratch is really challenging, especially getting that single set of learning objectives and things like that. So I think this is a really nice model. It looks like we have somebody put something, nope, somebody says, thank you for all the hard work that went into pulling that together with several thumbs up and things like that. So, okay, thank you, Chrissy. And here I included Chrissy's contact email on the slide. Okay, so I do have a number of updates. I tried to put the newer information towards the beginning and then kind of the things that are reminders towards the end in case I have to rush through things at the end. So regarding assessment, there have been a lot of changes with assessments over this program year, and the rollout of several of them has not been particularly smooth at kind of the national level, the vendors and the approval process. So I'm going to try and go over all of them here. Okay. So for adult basic education, so for the ABE levels, there are 3 assessments that the division is approving for all students for 25-26. And those are TABE 13-14, which became available through the computer-based version sometime January, February, but really the paper-based version wasn't available until later. And the conversion process for 11-12 to 13-14 for the licenses got delayed and all of that kind of stuff. But some of you started using TABE 13-14 in the current year in 24-25, but it is definitely approved for next year. CASAS Reading Goals 2, which was just approved by Octay in May, and CASAS Math Goals 2. Now, the CASAS Reading Goals 2, we did not approve for this program year, 24-25, because there was clearly not enough time to get it into eData. Even if you purchased an online version and started using it right away, you wouldn't have been able to report it to us. So CASAS Reading Goals is approved effective July 1. TABE 13-14 CASAS Math Goals have been approved for this year and will continue to be approved next year. There is an update on this slide and on a couple slides around assessment based on some feedback we got from some agencies after I sent out the slides last night. So, to the extent possible, well, here what I'll say is new students, so students who are not continuing from this year, new students should be assessed with these new assessments. And continuing students who don't have a valid assessment from this current year, who are continuing into next year, the priority and the preference is for you to use one of these new assessments and not to administer one of the old assessments to a new student. However, with the delay or with the late approval of the CASAS reading goals, really agencies, probably you haven't had the ability to purchase them in order to be able to use them beginning July 1. So we will allow you to use kind of the old, quote unquote, old, the CASAS reading goals. You may administer it as a pretest during the first quarter of 25-26, which would be July 1 to September 30th of 2025. That will give you enough time to purchase CASAS reading goals 2 to begin using it as the pretest moving forward after September 30th. You may start using it earlier. You can, start using CASAS reading goals 2 as soon as you get it, beginning July 1. But if you kind of have that transition for using it as a pretest in the first quarter. So for learners who are continuing from 24-25, who have valid assessments from 24-25 that can be rolled over into 25-26, you have kind of several options. Okay, you can, if you would like to, you can roll over a valid 24-25 test as a pretest. And I'm sorry, that exception is kind of got put in the wrong place. It was a last minute addition and I put it in the wrong place. So if you have students who are continuing from 24-25 into 25-26, and they have a valid assessment like TABE 11-12 or CASAS reading goals, quote unquote old one, in 24-25, and you want to use that as their pretest for 25-26, you may roll that over and use it as the pretest. If you want to use it as a pretest, you must roll it over. So if you have an assessment, we've had some agencies that instead of rolling over assessments from within eData, instead of going through the rollover process, have taken an assessment that they gave, say, in February, March, April, May, June, and have re-entered it with a new assessment date in the next program year. That is not what you're supposed to do. If you want to use an assessment that you have already given to a student in a prior program year, and it is still valid because it falls within that 150 days, you need to roll it over in eData, which brings it from the prior program year into the new one. So for continuing students, you may roll over assessments. You could choose to assess them with the new assessment, right? So you might have someone who has a TABE 11-12 from March, and you want to assess them with the TABE 13-14 in the beginning of July when they're continuing. That's fine. You're allowed to do that. But if you would like to use the TABE 11-12 from March as the pretest for 25-26, you must roll it over. Again, the one exception to rolling over assessments and administering a new administration of one of the old assessments would be the CASAS reading goals, which you can administer as a pretest in the first quarter of the next program year. If you use TABE 1112 or CASAS reading goals as the pretest for 25-26, in order to show an educational gain in 25-26, you kind of have two options. You can post-test with the old one, and we are allowing post-testing with the old versions through the full program year. It will be you will be able to enter it in eData through June 30th, 2026. Probably not best practice, but you will be able to do that. So you can post-test them with the old one. Or you could roll that over as the pretest. And then if you would like to, you could just immediately or shortly thereafter administer the new assessment and use that as kind of a secondary pretest and then post-test them with the new one. So you do have options. This will all be clarified in much better wording in the assessment policy when we get that released. The key thing is that TABE 1112 and CASAS reading goals will sunset June 30th, 2026. So if you happen to give somebody the TABE 1112 next May, you will not be able to roll that into 26-27. So this 25-26 is a transition year. And by the end of by next June, if you want to have assessments that you can roll into the following year, they will have to be the new ones. This slide is really just a reminder because the whole transition of the ESL assessments all happened last year. So just as a reminder, the second bulleted list are the ones that are no longer approved, right? The Best Literacy, Best Plus 2.0, CASAS Life and Work Reading and Listening are no longer allowable. You cannot roll them over into 25-26. You must use the ones in the upper bulleted list. So there are new assessment trainings for TABE and CASAS. These new assessments streamline the training process for certification. And then there are two buckets within the TABE and CASAS trainings. There's initial certification and then recertification. And all of these courses are still moderated by a facilitator. The initial certification course will include the PA Adult Learner Assessment Overview Model, which kind of combines an overview of best test administering practices and state policy with the test vendor training. There's also an observation portion where the participant observes a certified peer administering the assessment, and then the participant themselves are observed administering the assessment by that certified peer or another one. So in the first iteration of the courses, everyone is going to take this initial certification version so that kind of everybody is on the same page with the new assessments. Then the recertification is after everyone has taken the initial certification course, they'll be eligible for the recertification course. And this will be an abbreviated version of the PA Adult Learner Assessment Overview. No, they'll provide more information about what is actually involved and who gets to take it and what's involved in that. But there are those two. For programs who work with partners at your PA Career Link, the partners can take what we call partners training for whatever test they administer. They don't have a separate recertification course, and they should take this course for recertification. One thing about partners, I had heard from one agency that the partner, like a title, I think it was Title I Youth, was not going to be allowed to use quote unquote, well, the TABE 11-12, that they had to use TABE 13-14. I reached out to L&I. They were not aware of the newer Federal Register, which approved CASAS reading goals 2 and extended the sunset period for TABE 11-12 and CASAS reading goals. I shared that with them, and I believe they are going to do a patch in CWDS that will extend the allowable period for TABE 11-12 and CASAS reading goals to June 30th, 2026. Now that just happened this morning. So, I'm sure your partners don't know about it yet, but I did want to let you know that I was able to communicate with L&I, and they are planning to make that change. Okay. I don't get to see questions if I view. Are there any? Okay, we have some new messages. So we have some questions. Will a reading goals be a matching test with a reading goals 2? No. If you use reading goals as a pretest, then you must post-test with reading goals. You cannot post-test with reading goals 2. With these new assessments, none of the old versions can be paired with a new version as a pre-post test. Somebody said, I don't see specific PD in the portal for reading goals 2. What does that mean for staff who are trained in goals? Should we plan to take the recertification? I think I need to discuss that with my staff and with the PDS before I answer that. I will try to get an answer for that question to you soon, though. So in an email to you back in May, I mentioned entering secondary outcomes. There are a couple places in eData where you can enter them. On the Outcomes tab, there are secondary outcome measures built into the system. You can do set and met dates. There's also an agency-specific goals tab that includes agency-specific goals and adult-specific goals. It is not mandatory to do that. And we will not be using them for agency performance, right? We don't have any kind of data match or documentation that comes to us that verifies that what you're saying is a success is actually a success. So, these are clearly subjective measures, but when you do have success, when students do have successes like that, it does give us some additional information to share with, legislators and other people who might come to us and say, hey, what are some of the successes? Because of course we know that educational functioning level, measurable skill gain is it's not easy. It's basically the equivalent of 2 grade levels. And we know, it's only for people who have enough hours to be post-tested, and they might show a scale score gain, but they don't show an EFL gain. We know all of the nuances of it, but people from the outside looking in don't understand those nuances, and they're looking at it like a graduation rate or something, and they may not think it looks all that great. So being able to say, okay, we have students, maybe they didn't show a full measurable skill gain, but here are some of the other outcomes that they got, which is what they were looking for. It's just additional information for us. But as we're moving into, data entry for the end of the year, the key thing is to get the required data in over entering secondary outcomes. And I apparently skipped this slide, so I'm going to go back to it. So Michael and Steve from the eData Tech Support Project held a webinar yesterday with tips and reminders about the end of the year data entry. It was recorded and it will be posted to the PAIR website. Not yet, but it will be there. As a reminder, the last day that eData will be open for data entry is July 15th. That is also the last day you will be able to export your data for the Access template reports that you review prior to submitting the data quality validation form. That form is due to your advisor by July 25th. The form is at the end of policy C-130, which is on our Division of Adult Education's administrative documents page. And that form is a fillable PDF. In order to use the fill and sign options, you actually have to download the policy, which will download as a PDF, and then you kind of have to close it out and you have to save it somewhere, close it out, and then open it up so it opens up as the PDF with the fill and sign option. It's complicated, not sure why it works like that, but that is, and that allows you to fill it out and sign it electronically and email it, which we ask you to do. We ask you to email it, not mail it. Okay, we already did that one. 4 minutes, reminders. Okay, final expenditure reports. This is very similar to what we said last year, and you do have the slides. So if you need to share them with people, please do so. FERs will be due August 15th. They are not open yet, but they will be open sometime in July, early July. As a reminder, you do your quarterly reports. You do have to do a fourth quarter division quarterly expenditure report, which is due to the advisor by July 15th. After you complete that report, you should look at the budget revision tabs in the QER spreadsheet to determine if your program has shifted more than 10% of the grant amount among function codes and object codes. If your program has shifted more than 10% of the grant amount, you must submit a budget revision request to your advisor for approval before submitting the FER. And it is in an email. You're emailing it to them. That email communication replaces doing a formal budget revision in e-grants. So do not try to create a budget revision in e-grants. That just complicates things because it has to go through the whole approval process. So just send an email to your advisor and work with your advisor on that budget revision. If you do not submit a budget revision request prior to submitting the FER, that will delay the review and approval of your FER and could result in disallowed expenditures. And for those in the federally funded grants, if actual expenditures in 2300 plus indirect costs exceeds the amount approved in the grant, you must submit a revised request to negotiate administrative costs to your advisor for approval prior to submitting the FER. Some things to keep in mind. Descriptions should be detailed. You are submitting a report of actual expenditures, so you need to provide detail about how you used the funds. In the purchased equipment section, in the text box below the table, you must provide an explanation and justification for the equipment you purchased. And over the course of the program year, many of you have gotten permission from the division for expenditures that were not in the grant budget as originally approved. The advisors have requested that you enter a comment in the text box or the message board in the appropriate sections, stating that you got permission and referring to the email or phone call with a date if possible. So that's just a reminder to the advisors and then also to me that you did, while you had not budgeted for that, you did communicate with the division about that expenditure and got approval. There are floors and ceilings that you must abide by. If you're not the one who actually does the final expenditure reports, you have somebody in fiscal that's not necessarily familiar with the floors and ceilings, please make them aware of that and make sure that the floors and ceilings are abided by. A reminder about infrastructure costs, which we have to report as part of our federal reporting. There are two places that you enter them. You enter them, so the actual expenditures get entered in the contracted services section of the budgets. in that section, you need to enter infrastructure cost contributions separately from shared personnel costs. Okay, because we only report infrastructure costs, not shared personnel costs. And we need to be able to compare the amount that you have in the contracted services section with the amount that you enter in the infrastructure costs section towards the end of the FER. Reminder that the name in the contracted services section needs to be the name of the board. The name is not infrastructure costs. The name is not PA Career Link. The name is the name of the local board, because that is who you are giving the funds to cover the infrastructure costs. And then in the infrastructure costs section, which is only in, we use that information for our federal reporting. That's where we pull the numbers that we add up for our federal fiscal reporting and state performance report. So in this section, you will report the total amount of PA CareerLink infrastructure cost contributions paid from that particular grant. You include only infrastructure costs, do not include any shared personnel costs, do not include any local funds that you may have used. You're just telling us, for example, in the federal 064, this is how much of federal 064 funds we use to support infrastructure costs. In the state 064, this is how much of the state 064 grant funds we used to support infrastructure costs. That's the amount that goes in the infrastructure cost section. Career services, those are reported in the federal 064 and 061 grants. We collect this information because we are required to include it in our state performance report due October 1st. We provide guidance in the guidelines in 613.314 on the items to include and how to calculate. So please refer to those as you are doing career services. There's also an explanation in the FER around the items to include. So you need to determine the amount by totaling expenditures for intake, orientation, and pre-testing in 1691 and 2122, outreach costs from 2900, and information and referral services in 2122 and 2160. Report only those expenditures that align directly with those 5 career services. And do not include any local funds that were used to support career services. In general, be conservative with your calculations. Most agencies will likely report somewhere between 4 and 8% of the grant amount for career services. Agencies that have local funding to support the program may report lower amounts. Agencies that do a lot of one-on-one intake, orientation, and pre-testing may report higher amounts. Whatever you report, you should have a documented process to support the amount that you've reported. So if the advisor says, hey, how did you come up with this amount? You can say, here's what we did. And they can either say, great, that looks good, or they can say, ooh, you forgot to include something, or you need to redo it. But if you need to have a process. Here are some reminders about things to double check. Key things are total receipts must match exactly what is in FAI. And the total expenditures must match the total in the budget summary to the penny. If it's 1 penny off, we have to return it to you to fix it. We do ask that if you owe PDE money, that you do not send a check immediately, that you wait until we have processed the FER and approved it, and then Whitney will reach out to you requesting the check. We do need a separate check for each grant. And as a reminder, like the funds from different grants don't cancel each other out. So let's say you owe us $100,000 from your federal 064 and we owe you $50,000 on the state 064. You can't just say, okay, well, we'll just send you $50,000 of federal funds and then we'll shift those federal funds to the state funds to make that up. No, you can't do that. Like they're separate pots of money. We have to track them separately. So you'll have to send us a check for federal 064, 100,000, and you'll have to wait to get the 50,000 in the state 064 funds. I know this question has come up a lot. Trying to get through this quickly, sorry. 25-26 kickoff is July 22nd and 23rd. It's 10 to 4 on the 22nd and 9 to 12:30 on the 23rd. As always, we require all programs to attend. That means a program administrator or representative must attend both days. Agencies may bring an additional 2 to 3 additional staff. You can select the ones to attend based on what will be covered, and different staff may attend each day. If you have subgrantees, we do ask that at least one program admin from each of the subgrantees attends. We will be sending out an email with registration information and an agenda at a glance. Each staff member who is going to attend the kickoff should register separately because we are collecting information about who's attending what day. Also, there will be some breakout sessions, and you will be able to sign up for the breakout sessions while registering. And there will be information, a brief summary about each of those breakout sessions in the registration form, and we'll include that in the email as well. 25-26 monthly webinars, just as a heads up, I plan to continue having them on Thursdays at 11 a.m., the third Thursday of the month at 11 a.m. We are not having one in July because of the kickoff. I will send a new Teams meeting at the beginning of each program. When I send it out, I only send it to the program contacts, but you may forward it to other staff. If you want them to have the full year on their calendar, you need to make sure you open the series and forward the series. When your staff formally accept the series, that should add them to my Outlook to the send to list for me for the year. So they should get it for the full year then, every time I send something out. So before I do questions, I want to go to the next slide and say congratulations. We do have a few people who are retiring. So on the record, I want to say thank you so much for your service to the field of adult education and family literacy and for your dedication to your students. We wish you all the best. I am going to stop recording at this point because I'm going to name names and I don't necessarily like to have that on the recording. So let me stop recording.